Thank you, Ricky. Jigar, welcome to the stage. Thank you so much for being here. It was good to see you in action as we entered the stage, and that probably a microcosm of the things you've been working on for the past year and a half. So Jigar, you definitely don't need any introduction, but it probably wouldn't hurt if you just give a quick overview of the office you're working for and some of the initiatives, and then we can dive into virtual power plants.
Sure, thank you. And thanks for having me here today. Just really critical topic here that we're covering. The the Loan Programs Office has existed since 2005. It was created in the 2005 Energy Act. It really had its heyday, I'd say, from 2009 to 2011, where we put out roughly $32 billion worth of loans. That loan portfolio has matured such that we have roughly, I think, $1.04 billion of losses, which is roughly 3.3%, which is in line with commercial banks. The Loan Programs Office exists to help technologies cross the bridge to bankability to full market acceptance. Like, I think one of the things that we've learned is that there are many technologies that have been piloted to death, affectionate term, and a lot of these entrepreneurs are really unable to get to real scale. And for a lot of our projects, $1 billion is sort of the opening ticket to really be able to get to cost effectiveness without subsidies and really, proving things at commercial scale. So, and our applications range from, obviously, in Title 17, you've got transmission lines and carbon management projects and virtual power plants and hydrogen these days, EV charger rollouts, et cetera. In the ATVM program, which is the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program, you've got the loans we made to Tesla and Ford and Nissan, and now we're doing the next generation of loans to the battery manufacturing plants, critical minerals, and other types of projects. And then we have a tribal energy loan program that we manage, as well as this new 1706 program around repurposing existing energy sites. And so we're busy. We're up to about 200 plus employees now. We've already received 125 applications seeking roughly $119 billion of loan proceeds. And we're actively announcing deals here every, 3 weeks or so.
Wow, congrats. That is a significant amount of kind of volume in a relatively short amount of time. But I'm really excited to dive into virtual power plants, especially as you kind of got to hear how this nexus all comes together, communities, utilities, cities, and even this equity pillar is key. And so just in the quick, like, how do you see virtual power plants really helping can benefit cities, utilities, and ultimately communities?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I start with the premise that we've been doing virtual power plants for the better part of 35, 40 years, right? So for those of us who've been around that long and have owned homes for, much of that period, Pepco would come to you and say, we're going to give you a $4 per month discount on your bill if you let us put this device on your air conditioning system that we can then shut off when we need to, save the grid or whatever it is, right? That demand flexibility is a virtual power plant. Right now, what's happened today is that, as opposed to when I was getting that done in 1998 or 1997, we all now have apps on our phone that allow you to change the temperature of a thermostat using that app. You have the ability to order food automatically through your smart refrigerator. You have the ability to set the temperature on your water heater through a smart water heater. You have the ability to turn on and off the charging of your electric car using an app on your phone. So, you now have your own little box of connected devices, folder, and, lots of apps in there. I mean, hell, people are making smart dishwashers and toasters these days. And so now the question really becomes, if you can talk to these devices via an app on your phone, what else can it be used for, right? To give you one example, electric vehicles. For most people who plug in their electric vehicle, they plug it in for a minimum of 11 hours. right? They come back from work, they come back from picking up the kids from school, whatever it is, they plug it in. They're plugged in for 11 hours. Only an hour of that is actually charging. Right? The rest of it, they're just plugged in, right? And it's always the first hour that they're charging because it's not smart. And so if everyone on their block basically plugs in at that exact same time, then the strain that it creates on the grid means that, the utility comes to you and says, well, if you guys want to do whatever you want to do, then we're going to have to spend $50 million to upgrade your distribution circuit so that we can expand it to be able to allow for you to do whatever you want to do. And that's what we've been doing since the 1980s. Every time consumers want to do whatever they want to do, the utility says, well, we'll just upgrade the system to help you. Well, today, the capacity utilization of those grids has gone from 60% down to 40%, right? So as a result, you have less kilowatt hours to share those costs over, and as a result, rates have been going up by 5 to 7% a year, right? And so the question is, now that we're going to electrify more stuff, right, particularly electric vehicles and heat pumps, but it could be other things as well, can we do this more intelligently this time around, where we use all of these features that people already want because they've got apps on their phone, to help schedule loads in ways that are not disruptive at all to consumers, to be able to manage the grids better and our infrastructure better. And then the last piece of it is, for some of these programs that have been running for the better part of 5 years or so, the payments to households to participate in demand flexibility can pay for a third of the entire bill, which is no longer the $4 a month I was being offered by Pepco, but a lot more than that, right? And so not everyone has to opt into this. Not everyone has to want to do this. But if you do want to do this, it could be a lot of money.
That's fantastic. So try to unpack that a little bit in three parts. One, just what are those core technologies that you see that really make up? Because I know it's a long answer but which ones do you see really emphasize what could make a good virtual power plant? And number two, who owns them? And number three, how do you pay for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's 4 core technologies that I'm interested in, although there's 50 other ones that entrepreneurs are interested in. So I'm certainly not telling entrepreneurs that we're disinterested in your good idea. I'm just focusing on 4. So the 4 that I'm focused on are, 1, EV charging. Right, there's a lot of folks putting in home chargers and workplace chargers and things like that. 2 is water heating. We have a 30-year track record in this country of doing controlled water heating, mostly led by the rural electric co-ops. But it's really easy to do, and consumers really don't care. They're like, after they finish their shower, they don't care if their water heater turns on immediately or if it turns on at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, right? 3 is your smart thermostat, right? Most folks don't care if you move the thermostat that they have plus or minus 1 degree, and then some folks don't care if it's plus or minus 2 degrees, and it depends on comfort, right? And also depends on how tight your home is and whether the temperature changes there. And 4th are batteries. Right, so many people are putting in batteries in their homes, either with solar or just as like sort of battery backup system, right? And so for those folks, like, batteries can be bid into the capacity markets and all that stuff. So I would say those are the 4 technologies that we seem to have the most interest in the loan programs office for. I'd say the next question is financing. In general, I'd say that for solar, a lot of people use financing, right? For a variety of reasons, variety of FICO scores, variety of income levels, because they basically are saying, I don't really want to pay cash for this thing. I want to be able to hold somebody accountable and withhold my monthly payment, which you're not allowed to do contractually, but I understand the feeling. If someone doesn't do maintenance, right? If they're taking too long, you're like, screw them, I'm not going to pay. And so a lot of folks finance that, which is great. For the other components, I don't know that financing is necessarily featured. Like when someone's water heater breaks, I'm not sure they necessarily finance a new one, or heat pump. But 43% of American households who buy appliances every month are low moderate income. And for many of those households, they don't have that $1,000 or $4,000 or $7,000 lying around for when that occurs. And make no mistake, when those appliances are replaced, it's generally always an emergency, right? Like you knew it was on the fritz, but you didn't do anything about it, and then like it breaks, and you're like, I got to fix it today. And so when that happens, a lot of LMI customers get screwed, right? Because the person that they're going to go to is somebody who charges them $200 more for the appliance than they should be paying for a water heater, or $2,000 more than they should be paying for a heat pump. And then they also get charged 12 to 14% interest on top of that. So their net interest rate is 30% on that transaction, right? Which is ridiculous. And so part of this is intervening with tools and solutions so that people actually have the ability to finance these things at a reasonable interest rate based on FICO score and income and all the other things, which are generally vary between 4% and 8% interest, right? And then the last thing is figuring out whether people want to be opted into these virtual power plants, right? Because if you wait for people to acquire customers after the fact, it's like 7 mailers later, 3, phone calls you didn't recognize later, you're being like hounded to like opt into something. When you're doing financing or when you're installing an appliance, if that person says, well, click here if you really want to, have access to these other revenue streams, well, now the cost of subscribing someone into a virtual power plant could be as low as zero, because it just happens when they do the financing or when they have the system installed, right? So trying to figure out how you actually reach customers without bombarding them with mail and phone calls is another piece of this.
Yeah. So maybe follow up there. I mean, maybe with some examples you've seen. I do recall over the summer when I was in California and seeing friends who had Teslas, and they had obviously they could afford the Powerwall. They were getting notifications to opt into their virtual power plants. But can you maybe provide one or two other examples of you seeing where they've been successful and impactful?
Yeah, I just think that, well, let's start with the macro, because I feel like the micro is interesting, but sometimes people lack context of the macro. I think 10% of the entire electricity system pays for what we call balancing, right? So it's not actual generation or transmission and distribution or last mile. It's making sure voltages equal each other all the time and frequency equals each other all the time, right? So you're turning things on and off because the system always needs to be demand equaling supply every microsecond of the day, right? And so we use things like natural gas peaker plants. We use central station battery storage these days. We use all sorts of these sort of tools within the grid to do that balancing, right? Now the question becomes, if you want to participate in those revenue streams, right, how would you do so, right? So we have this thing called FERC Order 2222 that Neil Chatterjee put in place, under the last administration, and it's now being implemented under this administration. And, we have it launched in the PJM, which is the independent system operator from Illinois through roughly North Carolina. You've got the New York ISO, which covers New York, and the California ISO that covers California. All three of them have programs that have launched that say, if you aggregate, I think it's a minimum of like 100 kilowatts of load, and you bid it into the market, you get paid the same amount of money that a natural gas peaker plant gets paid, right? Which could be a lot, because when like a crisis occurs, sometimes they pay you $1 a kilowatt hour, or I think in California it was $2 a kilowatt hour, right? So that could be a lot of money. Like so the question is, how do you opt into that, right? And how does that process work? So that's one piece of it. And then the question really becomes like, do you really want to be an expert at this at the homeowner level? Like, are you going to like call your, next door group or your Facebook group and say, hey, I'm in, how about you guys get in? If we can get to 100 kilowatts, I can do this. And my 12-year-old son's going to bid for us on the computer. No, like in general, like you want to log into an aggregator. And so there are these companies that have set themselves up as aggregators, and you opt into their system, and then you agree to their terms and conditions. And some of them might say, we're only going to dispatch you and an emergency situation. Or some folks might say, no, you can dispatch me every day. Like I want to actually, be helpful to the grid all the time, right? And so each person can decide what level of, sort of support they want to provide to this, and that corresponds to a level of cash that gets paid to them, right? And so, but just some micro examples, like in Texas, they just unlocked one of the larger virtual power plants with Tesla, right? And so that program launched. In California, there were all these like micro pilot programs with companies like Ohm Connect or Swell Energy or others. I think in the last year, these virtual power plants have saved the grid in New York, Texas, and in California. So these programs have been expanded by 10x. And so you now see a lot of the community choice aggregation groups in California and others that are aggregating up customers to help participate in these programs. And so in general, I would say on a micro basis, you can do that. In California, I'd say like Franklin Energy and some of those companies are really active. They actually will estimate what they think the VPP payments will be for your appliance for the next 5 or 10 years and try to give you a rebate up front. Full disclosure, that means they're taking probably 40% of the take, but that's your choice. But even with that, they're offering you a 33% discount on the appliance in order to do that, right? So these numbers can be quite large in terms of the value of each individual unit on a micro basis.
Wow. So as you know, we have a good group of array of stakeholders from government, utilities, cities. So what can we as the collective audience here do to do a better job of educating the broader community of this opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of this is recognizing that how big this opportunity really is, right? So you start with saying if 10% of the entire grid's revenue goes to balancing, right? And if enough people opt in, they can take all of that revenue, right? Then you can start to see that, the total revenue there is probably $20 billion a year, right? So now the question becomes, who gets that $20 billion a year, right? The people who opt in to these virtual power plants get the $20 billion a year. Historically, the people who've opted into these virtual power plants are generally wealthier consumers because they generally are more it's easier to reach those consumers through information campaigns, et cetera, and people just don't bother figuring out how to reach out to LMI communities. But we could do it differently this time around, and we could actually purposefully go to LMI communities and say, do you want to be first in line? If you don't, that's totally fine. We're not judging, but we're just saying, here's the pot of gold. It's worth roughly $20 billion, and not this week, but we think by 2030 it will be. And then once that occurs, who wants to opt into that, right? And I do think it's an intentional effort. We talk about all these things Justice 40. We talk about disadvantaged communities. We talk about 30% interest rates a lot of folks have to pay because nobody gets free appliances from their church or other places. People pay for these things. But I do think that there's a level of, we got this weatherization money from DOE, and it was enough to help 473 households. So that's all we did. But there's 10,000 people on that list. And so, you're like, what do you want to do with the rest of those people, right? And so that we have these larger pools of money that are available to help people manage their bills long term, right? And I think in general there has been a reticence to get involved with consumers, right? And people are like, well, let's just build a community solar plant in the middle of nowhere and use the magic of offsetting bills to give people discounts on their bills. And, I'm a big fan of community solar, don't get me wrong. But for many American households, they actually have old refrigerators, old water heaters, old air conditioning systems, right? And we have these next generation appliances that are not only more efficient than what they're replacing, but also come with these features that allow you to opt them into a virtual power plant. And so I do think that there is a level of intentionality that cities have to have when they do these things. Because remember, they already have 5 programs or 10 programs targeting these communities, right? They already have LIHEAP, weatherization, bill assistance programs, all sorts of things. And it is expensive to talk to a lot of these households because there's a low level of trust. So if you're going to spend the money to talk to these households already, then let's talk to them about all of the different programs that they could benefit from at one time, and let's give them a leg up to be able to take advantage of this big $20 billion pot of gold that's coming in 2030.
So that kind of brings up the next question. So I assume the LPO office is looking at some novel approaches on how to enable that. And are you starting to see some models and maybe some buy-in from both maybe communities or entrepreneurs on how to maybe triangulate to take advantage?
Yeah, I mean, so the Department of Energy has done research for many, many years around loans and loan repayment rates and how this stuff works. There have been, very long dated pilot programs from the Michigan Saves program, NYSERDA in New York, the Connecticut Green Bank, and others. And we put out a report last year showing that the default rate on these types of loans is far lower than is assumed by Wall Street. And so it's roughly half of the defaults in credit card receivables and healthcare receivables, which is what the proxy is usually. And as a result, people are charging low-income consumers way too much, right? Because they're assuming in their spreadsheet a loss rate equivalent to credit card receivables or healthcare receivables. That means they charge more like 12% instead of 8% that you would normally charge if you had more appropriate loss rates. So large financial fintech companies have been coming to us saying, hey, we want to lend to LMI customers, but we're having this challenge with convincing S&P or Moody's or Kroll to believe your data. Right, and so we've said, well, we believe our data, so we'll give you a guarantee using the full faith and credit of the federal government to, guarantee these loans. And, we have the same loss rates and stuff that we predict. So we're not, guaranteeing it to the point where we're planning to lose money. We have, structured it in a way where we think we have thought it through well and that our guarantee would not lose money, right? And as a result of doing that, first we're able to increase the amount of LMI content within these portfolios from 3% to 25%. And so it provides a lot more financing to LMI customers. But also, we've forced S&P and Moody's and Kroll to read the data because they're kind of feeling a little embarrassed right now. And they're saying, well, why is the federal government having to step in here when we're a well-functioning market? And I'm like, well, you're not as well-functioning as you think you are. And so they're starting to, actually go, wait a second, maybe we should update our models. And I was like, yeah, we've been telling you that for 7 years. So there's a real positive feedback loop occurring. So our hope is that we don't have to keep doing this, right? That they'll just fix their data and then, folks will be treated more fairly and then we can exit stage left. We're not there yet, but the loan programs office is playing a critical role in getting people to pay attention to the data.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating and eye-opening. And so you're pushing the envelope across several things. I think the finance piece is pretty unprecedented, and just because that industry seems to be very, very entrenched before it moves, and providing them data is probably one way to get them to open up. But we have a few minutes here, so I'd love to get a few questions from the audience for Jigar. Someone wants to raise their hand or...
Thank you so much. This is really, really interesting. Several of us here are from Michigan and big supporters of the Michigan Saves program, which is awesome. And my question is kind of related to that on the financing side, as you guys are looking at this with loan programs in other states, but also in Michigan, that connection to the sort of aggregators and the getting into the virtual doesn't seem like it's happening yet. I know Michigan Saves is working on that, and that's sort of happening. But from a consumer standpoint, how can we maybe focus in on maybe some of those Justice 40 areas, or is there a good mechanism for connecting what are some of these advanced financing programs with helping, me who replaces my whatever in my house to say, yeah, I'm going to actually spend the extra $50 or $100, because that's how households make decisions, right? And do it in a way that gets me this type of appliance, and the application to this, virtual power plant is more seamless. Because right now I would have to go and find that. I might have a seamless process on the Michigan Save side, but not so much on the aggregator side.
Yeah, so great question, and a couple-part answer, I'd say. So the aggregators are not going to show up without a program from the Michigan Public Service Commission, right? So there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation where Michigan Public Service Commission is saying, well, why would we do this program? We don't see any demand, right? And so part of what we're doing is, step one is just to say, almost all of the appliances available today have this connectivity. So it's not $50 to $100 more. It's whatever appliance you want. Pretty much has this feature, and if it doesn't have it this week, they're going to have it next year. So I think that whenever we catch consumers during the replacement cycle, it's worth doing. And once you have a loan in place, some of these loans are only 2 years. Like the loans that we're sponsoring are more like 10 years. And so then the payments are much lower because you're amortizing over a much longer period of time. And so that first step is really just helping LMI customers go from 30% interest loans to, like 6 to 8% interest loans, just because you're able to negotiate good prices for them on the appliance side, as well as giving them reasonable price financing with our guarantee. The next level is providing the aggregator or Michigan Saves the right to opt those customers into a VPP when it becomes available. So now you get past the chicken and egg situation. You can say to Michigan Public Service Commission, hey, we have 700 megawatts of load that we have the ability to opt into something when you guys decide that you want something that's 90% cheaper than what you keep doing, right? And they're like, oh, crap, I guess that makes sense, right? So now you can opt them in. Great. Separately, we want consumer protections. We don't want people to be opted in without their full buy-in. So then we send them a letter, right, and says, hey, as per your loan agreement, you are opted into this VPP program. You'll be officially enrolled in it within 30 days. If you don't want it, then feel free to call us or email us or whatever and tell us you want to be opted out, right? So then they can opt out if they don't want to be part of that flexibility program and don't want that revenue. But I do think there's a chicken and egg situation. But the first phase of it is just to get people into appliance loans that are way cheaper than what they're being sucked into now, right? And then the optionality on the VPPs.
Question.
You actually, Jigar, you stole my thunder on that. I was going to say the PPP, or public-private partnership, as it's more commonly known, is a great mechanism, I think, to prime the pump, where the innovation of industry is coupled with the financial backing of the government. And that's my whole comment on there. And I think that we can do a lot more proactive stuff with that to find inequities and pull them out with public-private partnerships.
That's great. I think there's a question that's been there for a little while.
Hi, I'm Denise New. I'm just curious, has there been any conversation with the U.S. Treasury Department, the CDFI fund, particularly around the community development financing institutes, and how these loans might be able to roll out to communities, because they're already set up for lending in low and moderate income communities? Is there any conversation yet?
Yeah, so we definitely are working with, oh gosh, what's IPC stand for? Inclusive Prosperity Capital, I think. And they work with hundreds of CDFIs. So, I mean, we are working with them. I would say that the challenge with working with CDFIs broadly is that they don't, as I understand it, they don't really necessarily want to hold the sheer volume of loans that we're talking about here on their balance sheet. For some communities, I mean, you could easily get to, $1 billion in loans over 5 years, right? I mean, like, just the math here is that, so all three of those categories that I talked about, three of the four categories that I talked about would be roughly $1 trillion, I would say, of loans over the next 9 years or so, or 10 years. And so for the CDFIs, I think that it's absolutely essential for them to participate, and we are helping them. But I just think that like the sheer size of the loan book we're talking about here, in general, would dwarf a lot of the CDFIs. And then once you add electric vehicles and chargers in there, that's another 17 trillion. No worries.
Thank you, Jigar. One quick question we have right there.
Hi, thank you. I remember a presentation before lunch. One of the presenters was talking about how financing for electric utility co-ops is also a little hard because financiers don't see a great ROI. It sounds like there's a lot of focus on finance for your effort and what you're involved in. To what degree does sort of the fiduciary duty impair the ability to deliver like societally good outcomes and getting cheaper appliances to customers and reducing our carbon footprint and demand on the electrical grid?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and one that I don't know that I have any better answer for than you have. I mean, I'm a hammer, so everything looks like a nail. So, like, when you run a loan program, like, your solution is a loan. But I guess what I would say is that in general, we are really trying to work at that $1 trillion, $17 trillion scale, right? And so unless you can find some sort of harmony between repayment rates of customers and services provided and all these things, then at some point you run out of money. And you run out of impact, which is I think what happens in general in this sector is that we have we 10x the weatherization budget, which is great, but that still only helps 4% of the homes that are available for weatherization, right? Or we run out of like this bucket of money or that bucket of money, and so I don't know that we're at the Loan Programs Office trying to replace those other tools, and so those other tools are necessary and will continue to be prioritized. But I think what we are doing is saying, as Barbara Einrich, who passed away last year, said in her Nickel and Dime book, like, we just think it shouldn't be expensive to be poor, right? So, like, we should make sure that they have access to the same financing tools that everyone else has, right? And on a sustainable basis. And then if let's say the loan interest rate on a sustainable basis comes in at 9%, let's say, right? Because of the losses expected at sub 640 FICO score, Michigan Saves or the state legislature or whatever could say, we're going to put up $20 million of first loss in front of these loans to be able to reduce that interest rate from 9% to 7%, right? And they can make that choice, right? But like it should be important to note that the unsubsidized rate is sort of 9%, right? And that way public policy folks can operate at $1 trillion scale, right? And that's, I think, what's necessary to solve climate change in the president's vision of carbon-free electricity grid by 2035 and then the economy by 2050. I think it's right around the corner.
All right. Well, sorry, Hala. You can catch Jigar a little bit. This is a fascinating conversation, Jigar. We appreciate you coming out and just continue to thank you for being a champion of change and then progressiveness and continue the great work you're doing. If you're not following Jigar and the work he's doing, definitely look at the Loan Programs Office. Follow him on LinkedIn, Twitter. He's very active on all those platforms and appreciate you coming out.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.